One. Hi, Anne. Welcome to my podcast.
Hi, thanks, Tara, for having me.
I am super excited to talk. So I wanted to talk to you. You have written a book called My Child is Psychic, and you can find it at Anne's website, which we'll get to that at the end. But I want to we'll start at the beginning, and your story is so interesting. But what we're going to really get into later is about being in the closet and trying to keep our kids safe and not coming forward out of the closet with our kids' abilities and ourselves, and not being to be able to be completely true to the world about who we are. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So let's just start with, how did this all begin? Because I think, were you more mainstream mom? Were you
Definitely mainstream. Definitely mainstream. Being psychic and all of that was not in the forefront of our parenting or thought process or anything. I was very fortunate that I married somebody who did believe in psychics. It was something that early on we talked about. I kind of at one point said, when we were dating, just so you know, I believe in psychics, because I, at that time, was going to an intuitive at least once a year, like from my early 20s, just for fun. And I didn't live by what she told me, but I went out of curiosity. I used to watch Montel Williams and watch Sylvia Brown on there and just be intrigued by it. And so I was lucky that my husband believed, because he had his grandmother, one of his grandmother's best friends, was a really gifted psychic. So as a young kid, he grew up around this woman named Marie, and she did give readings to the family. And as he became older, a teenager, they became friends, and he would go and visit with her at her house. And she really talked to him about really deep topics regarding the spiritual world. And even then she said, someday after I'm gone, you're going to be able to talk to me when your mind is kind of settled and quiet. And then that was it. He didn't try to be psychic. He didn't try and do anything. It was just something that he knew. So, but when we had our daughter, still not ever thinking about it, we never all that time had crystals or any spiritual books, or had even been into a metaphysical store. I'd never been into one. He'd never been into one. And so when our daughter was born, we still didn't think about it. It was just something that we were aware of. But when she would be an infant and in her crib, she would kind of look up. I'd be standing there and she would look up past me and just be smiling. And I would say to her, like, oh, are you looking at your angels? Knowing that babies, the veil is still open. Maybe to back up a little bit, I'd worked in a nursing home for 9 years that had healthcare and independent living. So I had been around older people who were dying, and sometimes as they died. And I had seen elderly people with that same look and seeing angels. This is long before I had gotten married, and seeing angels. And so I knew that that was a thing, but I still didn't really talk about it. I just knew it sort of as a fact. So when my daughter would do that, it was the same type of look. There's just a certain beyond happiness look when you're seeing an angel. But she couldn't verbalize back as an infant, so she couldn't say, yeah, Mom, I'm seeing things. So I just would think that was cool, like, oh, and it'll stink because someday that'll go away, and you won't be able to see anything like me. So then as a toddler, she never ever said she was seeing anything. She was very empathic. Still at this time, I had no idea to put a label on any of it. When she was, 2 years old, we would be in Target, and if she heard a child that was crying 3 rows over, she would start to get really sad. And I would think she had just been perfectly happy, and then all of a sudden she would get really sad. And I was aware enough to know I could hear the child crying, to be able to say to her, Grace, you're fine. And that baby's fine too. Sometimes if it was a baby, I'd say that baby's just hungry, or Sometimes I even would take my cart and go so that we could actually see whoever it was that was crying, because usually it ended, like most kids stop crying, you know, they just didn't get what they wanted or something. So that was another sign. I just didn't realize what that meant. When she was in preschool, she would be in the classroom, and this is something that our teachers would tell me, that she would be across the room, and if another child was getting in trouble or being told to be quiet or something on the other side of the room, she would just freeze and just stare at whatever the situation was. If kids weren't being nice to each other, if somebody was being disciplined, and just focus on that situation until it stopped. And the teachers would say to me, she's really sensitive, you know, about like the other kids. And yeah, she was sensitive. And that is the adjective that I used to use, not knowing that I was covering up the reason for it. But I did her whole life say, she's sensitive, you know, we can't be in that crowded room. Like, she gets overstimulated, so she's sensitive. In the first and second grade, she would do things. It was the time when the Tinkerbell movie and Fern Gully, which if anybody hasn't watched Fern Gully with their kids, it's a really good one. She loved to be outside. And so we had all the little figurines of all the different characters, and she would take her fairy figurines and go out and in the landscaping build these little fairy houses. And again, I thought to myself, like, she's so creative, you know, what a great imagination, I would think. I mean, I felt proud of her for that, because I loved to do arts and crafts and have that creative side. So to me, I felt proud of that. So those were all like signs. And I don't know if it's because I never asked her, you know, and said, are you seeing anything? And she never thought to tell me she was seeing anything, because it was just the way it was. So like, why say the sun is out? We can all see the sun, and not realizing maybe everybody can't see the sun.
Yeah.
You know, kind of thing. She was not a huge verbal child, you know. It was almost like she could understand and was almost like projecting her thoughts. I always knew what she wanted. She always knew what I, you know, meant. It was the same thing in preschool and first and second grade, that she didn't feel the need to tell everybody everything. Some kids are kind of more like need the teacher's attention all the time and that kind of thing. She was very quiet. When she was 3 years old, she was born prematurely. And so when she was 3, I was still in the whole process of all the doctors telling me she should be evaluated for every little thing, even though she was fine. But I was typically a very obedient person my whole life. So if the doctor told me to do it, okay, I'll have her evaluated. So we had gone to a speech therapist, and she had several sessions. And in one of the sessions, the speech therapist got out a game out of a box and got it out. And so my daughter started playing with the pieces of the game that had little figurines in them and kind of like pretend playing. And the speech therapist said, I think she's going to need more therapy, you know, that she wasn't using the pieces and the way that they were meant to be. And initially, to be quite honest, I went home and cried because I felt like, what is the matter? Like, why is she saying that's such a bad thing? And is there something the matter? I mean, I started second guessing myself, when up until now I had thought, of course, like every mother, my daughter's perfect. Oh, she's, you know, this got a great imagination. But that's how we played at home, because that's how she liked to play. I was all about dressing up and pretending and playing. And I probably did talk about people that weren't there, not in a spiritual sense. That's just the way that we played, until I had finally a lady say to me, she's fine. You know your daughter better than anyone else. And you're right. She was doing what she does best, creative play. Nobody says that she has to play the game the way that the lady wanted her to play the game. And it was like finally when I got somebody else's permission to say, yeah, actually I am right. I do know my daughter better than anybody else, and she actually is fine. I just stopped going. It was at that point I thought, I'm not going to let anybody tell me there's something the matter with my daughter when I know that there's not. She's perfect, the way that she is. So those were like big aha moments for me. When we lived in Ireland, which is on the front page of the book, she knelt down on the way down from climbing a mountain, and knelt down and looked up at the sky. And it was one of those beautiful skies where the sun is shining this beam kind of down onto the ground through the clouds, and said, without looking at my husband and I, and said, oh, do you see that door to heaven? And we kind of looked at each other like we did see that the sky, it was beautiful, but no, we didn't see that. And we even realized, wow, she's seen something we can't see. But we still at the time never said to each other, what do you think she's, seeing? We never even had a discussion. We just thought, that's pretty cool. Like, yeah, great imagination. She probably can see something. Still, we never asked her anything about it, because when the moment was over, it was just over, and we went on with our day, our daily routine, our lives, and never questioned it. I never thought, oh, is she psychic? Oh, is she an empath? Because I didn't have that vocabulary. I didn't live in a spiritual community. I didn't know anybody that was aware of any of these things. So it wasn't even something that we talked about, So looking back now, I think, what an idiot. Like, how would I not have known that? But we didn't watch any television programs that were about psychic things. I think there's a lot more now on the internet and on TV, so it's a little bit more mainstream. And I don't know if it's because I'm into it now that I notice there's more metaphysical stores, or I know to look for those things. Now, probably had I looked for those things, I probably could have found them in all the different places we've lived, but I didn't at the time. So I don't know, it wasn't really until she was 10, and she did another time when she was in about the third grade, ask one of her cousins if she ever felt energy going into her. And of course, her cousin was like, that's weird, and no, she didn't. And so my daughter immediately, when she didn't get a response of, yeah, I get that too, then she just stopped talking about it. So it wasn't until she was 10 when she walked into the kitchen and like flat out said, I think your grandmother's in my room. Like, then we realized, like, I'm seeing the physical people are in my room. That then we were like, oh, we had a much bigger discussion about it then.
Do you want to talk about that moment, or do you?
Yeah.
That was like,
it was a huge, it was
the moment.
Yeah, it was huge. It was a life-changing moment for our whole family. So my husband and I were just in the kitchen, and my daughter came down the hall, happy as a lark, running down to tell us, I think your grandmother's in my room. And even at that exact second, I didn't click and think she was seeing her, even though I sort of, I guess, knew. But I did used to say to her, my Mimi, who was my grandmother, who I just adored, I did used to say to her, we'd have a lot of her earrings and purses and things that my daughter would use for dress up. And so when Grace would walk out wearing a pair of her grandmother's clip-on earrings or holding a purse, I'd say, oh, I bet Mimi's watching you, just loving that you're playing with that. That was part of my verbiage. So even when she did that, because I had always said that, because I always believed that everybody can see us from heaven or wherever we all think that they are. When she said that, I just felt like, oh, good. But then something inside of me followed up with, well, does she look like the picture that's on my dresser? And she said, no, she's got a bun on her hair's in a bun on top of her head. And she just like turned on a dime and went back to her room. And my husband and I looked at each other, and My grandmother had never worn her hair up in a bun, but Marie, my husband's grandmother's best friend, had. And I had seen a picture of her, though my daughter had never seen a picture of her. And we looked at each other like, oh my gosh, it's Marie. So we called Grace, come back to the kitchen. We have a few more questions for you. So we had her sit down at the table after my husband and I had had a few words ourselves, like, do you think that's what that is? And I'm like, it must be. And we kind of decided, geez, she must be able to see the spirits. And still at this point, we had not thought anything about anything. I had been to a local psychic where we lived, which was a good thing, as it turns out, that I had already had that experience. So she came back to the table, and so I said, my Mimi never wore her hair like that, but there is somebody that did. And so I had found a picture of Marie. So I showed Grace the picture, and I said, is this who you saw? And she said, yeah, she's in my room. And so we kind of explained to her, obviously you're seeing dead people, and she wasn't scared at all. And we never said, are you scared? Because she obviously wasn't. So we were like, that's pretty cool. What did she say? And she was like, oh, not much. She was just happy to see me. And I do think that familiar spirits or our guides know how much to say to kids to not have them be afraid. So I think Marie knew this is part of your big awakening, and here we go, everybody. So she kind of was being gentle with it at the beginning, and there was no big message. It was just as if a friend was showing up to say, hey, how are you? Grace, hey, I'm fine. And, it was just small talk kind of. So that was kind of exciting. And my husband and I were sort of behind the scenes kind of giddy, like, that's pretty cool, that Marie's talking to her, never even thinking about any other spirit other than Marie. We were still very naive and having our blinders on to what all of this meant. Because you think about when you see psychics on TV and somebody's coming for a sitting and the psychic just brings in the grandparent or the deceased husband or wife. You're just seeing them bring in one person at a time. You're not at all aware of there might be 300 spirits that the poor psychic is having to actually deal with, or energies that are around them. I wasn't aware of that at all. So that continued for a few nights, and it wasn't long. I mean, literally within the week that other spirits started showing up that then started to frighten my daughter. And so what had started out as, she thought it was great, it was fun, she was staying up at night waiting for Marie to show up so she could talk to her. She thought this was a really cool thing. To then when people that she didn't know were showing up, then that frightened her. So then really quickly we got to the point of, I need you to sleep in my room with me. I can't get these people to leave. It was a whole nother mind shift for us.
Did that challenge your faith, essentially? Like, not because for me,
yeah,
there are moments in this parenting journey of this, not having the degree of ability that my son has, and probably not my daughter either, but where I sit there and like, there are just moments where I'm like, maybe it's because I'm overly tired, where I'm like, this can't possibly be real. This is not real. And look at me in this position as in this podcast, like, I'll be the first one to say it. And then there's times, and then there are days where I'm like really fresh and I'm like, I'm able to help and I'm game to find help. And did you have that at all in that week?
Yeah. Oh no. I didn't initially that first week, and probably even the first year. I didn't have a sense of feeling angry, where I did get to a point where I felt like, what the heck? Yeah. I've had enough in my life go on that, at the beginning, I felt like because when she started to be afraid, we pretty quickly took her to a professional psychic who could help us understand what was going on. And pretty quickly were directed to go to a local metaphysical shop where we lived, which is I talk about Lucy in my book. And I met Lucy, and I spent a lot of time in there, and Lucy helped me with grace, knowing what to do. I would go in all the time. This happened, that happened. What should I do? What does it mean? All that kind of thing. And as my knowledge was growing pretty quick, it was like taking 4 years of college in 6 months. Like that's how I felt. Like I really learned a lot initially.
Yep.
And so I was able to stay one step ahead of whatever the big issue was, clearing our house. I got it. Once I figured that out, and then the next thing would come and I'd figure that out and the next thing. But as my daughter got into the middle school years, and which is hard anyways, even if you're not psychic, I don't know about boys, but just speaking from the girls' perspective, it's a very emotional time. Girls can be catty and all of that. And what I quickly realized was, by then I'd learned what it was to be an empath and all of those things. And imagine being able to feel what everybody else was feeling in the classroom. And it was hard on my daughter. Teachers saying things. I give an example in the book where my daughter was in choir class, and the instructor said, ask for a volunteer to sing a solo. So my daughter raised her hand and sang the solo, and the teacher said that was very nice. So when she got in the car after school, she just burst into tears. I'm thinking, like, what is the matter? And she told me that she had sang the solo, and the teacher said it was very nice. I'm thinking, that's nice, but she didn't mean it. And I thought, oh my gosh, how many times do we all do that? I do it all the time, of where you say one thing because you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings and it's not true. But what if an emotional child can hear what you're thinking, or if they know that you're lying to them, and how that feels to them? So when things like that would happen, I started to just think, this is not a blessing. Up until then,
yeah,
I really do feel like these kids are a gift to humanity. They're coming in with a whole new vibration and understanding and love that is going to change the world. And I always thought, wow. And I used to say, thank you for being born. It's not an easy time to be born, but if you're one of the warriors that are coming to help change the world, make humanity a better place, wow, thank you. But I started to think, let's just shut this down. Let's just shut all this off. Like, I don't want any more to do with it. This is nuts. Why, if you're given such a beautiful gift, does it have to hurt so much?
Yeah.
And
we're going through that right now. Big time.
yeah, it's horrible. Right.
Not because we haven't been doing this for years and it hasn't spiked up, but I mean, let's just look at chronologically. You said Grace's abilities started showing up around 10. So yeah. I have a 9.5-year-old, and so obviously we're not in the middle of the virus situation, and I can't tell you, every night I'm getting I just need to shut this down. This is not it, from him. This is not a gift. This is torture. And, working through that as a parent, right now I'm getting like emotional just even thinking about it. It's too hard here. I want to go home.
Yeah. Oh, geez.
How many,
we had that. Grace one time laid in bed and just cried. And and she said, I just want to go home. I just want to go home. And, you would think that would make a parent, that would make me feel sad, like she didn't want to be with me. But I completely understood what she meant.
Yeah.
She could remember her connection to source or heaven or whatever you want to call it. She could remember that how it felt before she had to come down and live in this 3D human body. And of course you want to say, no, much easier back there, much easier. But I will say that with every time something like that would happen, Initially, I met it with frustration, and I would put my daughter to bed and then go in and complain to my husband and let him have it, because that was the easiest place to have the punching bag,
Yeah.
And he was very steady and stable and like, I know you really don't mean this, kind of like, this is just ridiculous, da da da. But I started to, with new tools that I had, realize to call in help from the other side. And that was a big lesson that I had, that everybody's there to help, but you have to ask for it. They cannot come in and interfere with our lives unless you ask.
Yep.
And it's not that they're going to make life perfect by any means, because we do all have to go through what we're going through. We're learning and growing for a reason, but they can help, especially with children. So I learned when Grace would be upset at nighttime, which seemed to be, obviously the veil is more open and maybe it's just more quiet and there's less distraction. So she would become more sad or upset. And so I would say, if she wouldn't stop crying and I couldn't do anything about it, I would say, let's call in so-and-so. One was a Seraphim Angel that when we had taken this Seraphim Blueprint class, let's call in the Seraphim Angel. He has a name, but we called him in. And I couldn't see him. I mean, I literally felt like I was just speaking by faith. Thinking, okay, if I say it, maybe it'll come true. And he would come in and she would be able to see him. And I couldn't see him, but she could, and she could hear him. And she could then feel like she was being protected, or Archangel Michael, or whoever it is. I think we can give our kids all those tools. And even if we can't feel the energy from their guide or their guardian angel, they can kind of like, and to help them learn to tune into that. And when we started doing that, it really shifted for Grace. She started to feel like, okay, I've got the help. I just didn't know how to ask for it or who to ask.
This is something we need to talk about then, because you, in your book, which I loved, was during your process of trying to figure this out and finding the help in this metaphysical story, you and your husband began taking classes.
Yeah.
And
with our daughter, I took him with us too. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
With your daughter. So like, talk about like being like connected and supported. And I don't know about you, like, cause my son's obviously not going to take those classes. Just knowing him, he, even if I asked him, maybe now, but I'd be like, well, I'm taking them to like, if there's a piece in there that I'm missing,
right?
Because when I don't know how you feel, the more you knew as a parent, sure, it helps your perspective on how you look at your kid, but having that empathic nature of those children, it travels.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what I also realized was, I tend to be kind of more the uptight or the kind of parent.
Yeah.
And my husband is very calm and steady and does not overreact. He'll think about things, which is how my daughter sometimes is. But what I did realize, one, in taking the classes, which first of all, I want to say, I always have taken a class myself before I've ever introduced my daughter to it, ever. I've always gone to a psychic myself before I ever took my daughter to it. I've always gone to a metaphysical shop by myself before I ever took my daughter to it. I think that's super, super important.
Yes.
Because you have to know what resonates with you, which will then probably resonate with your child. Because there's plenty of spiritual people that are perfect, just fine, doing exactly what they should be doing, but not every single one resonated with me. Not every single place resonated with me. There were places that I knew were going to work for me and some that weren't going to work for me. And that was okay. It wasn't a judgment on that place is good or bad. It was just matching my energy, which I realize now. I mean, back at the time, early on, of course, I would come home and there were places and I'd say like, I don't know, I just didn't feel a good vibe in there. You know, it just wasn't for me. So I think that's super important for all parents to know. Don't ever take your child to something until you sort of have figured out what you think about it. So anyway, so I took the classes myself. It immediately kind of calmed my mind. The more I began to learn and the more I became in tune with, all of a sudden, my own gifts. I mean, it changed me. It took all of my attention away from thinking that my daughter was the only one with gifts, and placing all of that responsibility really on her. All the energy belongs to you kind of thing, that it really got me centered into, am I affecting her? Is she affecting me? I started to have the tools. The Seraphim Blueprint is kind of like Reiki. It's not Reiki, but it's the same, working with energy and things. But by taking it, I started running energies for myself, for her. I started to feel myself when she was upset. It was much easier for me to stay centered and calm and use the tools that I had learned. After I felt comfortable with it, and my husband and daughter started taking the classes with me, it changed for all of us. For one, my daughter by then had gone into the metaphysical stores, and for her it was nice to be around. It's not like, say you go to Target, and there's all different people, all different energies, and every energy is going every which way. If you go into a metaphysical store, pretty much most people's energies are like focused on the metaphysical things, whatever they're there for, if it's crystals or a class or angels or whatever. So you don't have to wonder, is anybody going to believe this or not believe? So when my daughter started taking the class, because she was so open, for her, it was almost like in school, her greatest gift was never recognized. The basketball player was recognized, or the most popular kid was recognized all the time. But because we had kept her pretty unique gift a secret, what really made her so special never was, my dog came in, was being recognized. But when she was in those classes, she was the youngest, but she was seriously the most gifted of everybody. So she all of a sudden was getting recognition from people she didn't know, of like, wow, cool. Not in a way of you're better than us. Yeah. It was a motivator, or what am I trying to say? It helped her self-esteem regarding her gift. Like, you don't have to be afraid of it. This is something really cool. And I think she started to then think, it's not a curse. It's really cool if you know how to control it. And here's the different things that you can use to control it. And so that was huge, huge for us. It expanded our community. It wasn't that we all of a sudden became best friends with everybody that we met, but we could walk into the two stores that we went to and feel at home, feel like you could just be yourself. If you said, I can hear the planets talking, nobody was going to look at you like you were crazy. If you went in and you were frazzled, there was always somebody right there to help. Either do energy work on you, teach you a technique, teach you how to cut the cords. Everybody has a different way of cutting the cords. And it would be things like that where I thought, I didn't know that. I didn't know how to cut the cords of the energy that, from all the people that you've been in contact with every day. But every time somebody taught my daughter something, they were teaching me. Yeah. So we were growing together, if that makes sense.
Well, and then I'm pretty sure, obviously I know it happened for you too, is then you start to notice it in yourself, because it starts to awaken things in yourself.
Yeah.
Which gives you a greater compassion for what they're going through, because you start getting snippets of it, but then you start awakening.
Right. I really became aware of too how much I could affect my daughter. I want to say she wasn't really reading my mind, but there were times when she wasn't reading it word for word, but she would know if I was in turmoil about something. We might be driving home from school, and, you know, I think all of us parents do this because we have a whole nother set of worries that we're thinking about than a kid has, generally speaking, not the psychic kids. And so I would be running through my mind if somebody in my family had irritated me, you know, and thinking all the things I'd like to say to them. And she sometimes would look over and say, Mom, and I'd be like, what? And she'd say, are you okay? It's like, she's like, I'm not trying to read your mind. And then it would click to me like, oh my gosh, like if she could feel all the things that I was just thinking, which most of the time then weren't pleasant. And so it made me aware of when I would start to get in that monkey brain, you know, hamster wheel mind, even if she's not around, I still will try and stop myself and start and think like, oh boy, yeah, no, don't go down. The energy I'm creating isn't good. And I'll start to try and think of like good things. Doesn't mean I don't ever think that, but do you know what I mean? Like,
yes, I know
those
exactly
were
what you
things
mean.
that I realized, wow, that's affecting her the same way I realize now if I'm in a room with somebody who is either a jerk or isn't, you know, is not nice, I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Do you know? I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
it's an evolution of how we all are so connected.
Yes.
Yeah.
Big time. And then, okay, so I'm going to transition now into being in the closet about that because it creates a greenhouse, you know,
Yeah. You're isolated.
the isolation.
Mm-hmm.
I'd
Yeah.
love to talk more about that with you.
Yeah, that's huge because and this was a big lesson. And I mean, we're still in the closet, so to speak, other than with our spiritual
Well,
family.
we can talk about this too. I mean, I'm addressing you as
Okay.
Anne and Grace. In
Yeah.
your book, you're Mary, Anna, and Hannah because you wrote this a few years ago.
Right. And I did use different names because I didn't want people to look us up on the internet. I wanted my daughter to just be able to be herself, have her own life. And this was something that she taught me early on, was she can remember past lives. So there was a time when she one day walked into my room and said, you know, you do know, she just went like this, you do know I was your father, don't you? And she just turned and walked out. And I was like, like past lives and all of us having lives together and all of that, I hadn't even thought about it. So that took me a few minutes to adjust my brain because I was putting away laundry. It wasn't something that I was ready, you know, to respond to. But in the course of all of that and understanding our past lives, our connections, why we're here, my friend Lucy, or the owner of the store, who's now my friend, did tell me once, you know, when I would be very frustrated, why don't I have these abilities so that I can help her? Like, why would I not be able to hear spirits? Why would you send me a kid like this, God, if they're so special, don't you want me to be able to help them? And Lucy said, you know, one reason that your gifts will strengthen, but one reason they haven't is because Grace just wanted to have a normal childhood. She didn't want it to all be about all of this. So if you didn't have the gifts, you weren't going to start all of this metaphysical stuff early on. She was going to have a normal childhood. But that's not entirely the point of being in the closet. So anyways, in understanding some of that, when she was little, when she would do all of these little quirky things, and I wasn't putting a label on it, I would say she's creative, or, you know, that's the way she does it, or she's sensitive. And I was very much the kind of mom that was like, some people would say not overbearing or controlling, but I wanted to always make sure that her environment was calm. Or if she was having a play date and the other kid was getting upset, I'd make everybody happy, you know, trying to keep the mood happy because that's kind of what made her happy. Yeah. And so I sort of was like the bulldozer in her life, paving the way so that everything behind, she could have a calm existence, which did work until I couldn't bulldoze. I could not be in middle school with her. I could not be with her friends and her all the time. Um, so I was using those words in middle school. I would say to her teachers, I know she's kind of quirky, because I could sense that people were looking like, they couldn't quite figure her out.
Yeah.
They just couldn't quite figure it out. She knew things. I mean, and I do think that a lot of these gifted kids are really smart. My daughter's really smart. And you wonder, like, how do they know all this stuff? Teachers would, or they might be thinking of something, and she would raise her hand and, I don't know, help the conversation. So I sensed that definitely after she was 10 and really awakened. I could sense that they were looking. So I would say, I know she's quirky, or she's
Yeah.
sensitive, or whatever. But I thought, I'm not gonna tell any of you. When she was in the 5th or 6th grade, she had, in middle school, which was really difficult, she had a hard time not letting the spirits affect her during school. And there was one particular day where there was a sad spirit that had come up and stood by her. And I think the spirits, because they can see these kids' bright lights, they're attracted to it. And I say it's kind of like, if you're in another country, let's say you went to Italy, and everybody was speaking Italian, and you were an American and you didn't speak any Italian, but across the room you heard somebody speaking English, you would be like, oh, you speak English, and you would want to go so that you could communicate with that person.
Yeah.
It's the same way with spirits and these kids with bright lights. They see the bright light, and they're like, and if the kid can see them, they're like, you can see us? Oh my gosh. And it makes them want to talk even more. So this spirit had been standing next to my daughter, wanting to try and get my daughter's attention, like, talk to me, talk to me. My daughter sat there, and because we told her, just ignore them, tell them to go away, and tried to ignore them, but she couldn't. And so she started to cry, because my daughter did, because she could feel the emotion. So she was crying and couldn't stop, like a sobbing cry in middle school. So the teacher asked her what was the matter, and she said, nothing, nothing, because at this point I had instilled in her 100 times a day, don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody, do not tell anybody that you can talk to spirits. People are going to not understand and either think you're crazy, I'm crazy, whatever.
Yeah.
So the teacher kept persisting, and after class took my daughter to the library and sat her down, kind of like, you can tell me what's the matter. Almost like, is there something, I mean, to me, I felt like she was saying, is there something the matter at home? Is there, like, is there something deeper?
Yeah. That she's trying to be the outlet as best she can.
Right. And my daughter broke down and told her, well, I can see spirits, and there was a sad spirit standing next to me, and I just couldn't stop crying. And so when my daughter was telling me this, I tell it in the book, I just thought, oh my gosh, I've told you not to tell me, like, are you kidding me? Like, you couldn't just make something up. And I realized that it really was my fear that I had placed on my daughter, creating her more pain. I was worried about what people might think of my daughter, which was then a reflection on me as the parent.
Yeah.
Raising a crazy kid, a kid that makes stuff up, all of those things. And because for years I told my daughter, don't tell anyone. And she sort of, I think, would have probably fared better had she just been able to be herself. And right off the bat, if you were going to believe her, great. If you weren't, then okay, then you'd go away. But I didn't do that. I kept telling her to be quiet about it, because I didn't want people to judge.
You know what I did, which like kind of disgusts me now. I hate to say it, but like my son had diagnoses. So he had been diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder, sensory processing disorder, generalized anxiety. And what I would do, and I would like use those as when things would happen in public, or he would say things, because usually he's usually very, he does not want to hide it. He has no interest in hiding it.
Yeah.
And because it's all feels, and he knows you're trying to, he knows somebody's trying to put blinders on, he calls them out, which I'm like, you really don't need to do that. But
Yeah.
he would hide behind his diagnoses, and I would use them to blind other people, is what I would do. And I don't do that anymore, because when it's like when you're like talking about something not being true and then it comes true, not that that's going to come true with him. I didn't want him to start hearing those things, and then that he really start believing that I think that he was broken, and that he was those things.
Right. Yeah.
And like, I know, it's a learning curve. What did Maya Angelou say? Like, once you know better, do better. And then when you know better again, do better again. Like, like, I know, but you look back now, and I mean, amongst other things that I've done in my past, I look back and I'm like, God, why did I do that?
Yeah, it is. But it is a learning curve. And I think that, we're not really, it's going by a lot quicker than we think. Like, I think, hey, I learned that lesson within a couple of years. That's pretty good. I mean, of learning that, of embracing it, the gift, instead of pretending it's something else. Now, we still don't talk about it. My daughter goes to a Christian school, and no, I mean, she's like, she wouldn't tell anybody. Like, when she graduates from high school, she was like, oh, I'll be able to tell everybody everything that I know. But right now it's like, we're still sort of playing the game in our everyday societal, interactions with people, which maybe isn't the right thing to do. I'm not sure. We have enough friends and people that in our spiritual community that we can be ourselves, and we do talk about it. We have friends come over to our house and talk all spiritual stuff, and sometimes my daughter will sit there and join in, and sometimes she won't, but it's an available thing. My family, they have actually just in the last few months seen my book. I didn't tell them that I was writing it. I never told my family because I really wanted the people closest to my daughter to see her, to not see her gift, because I know how easy it is to, when there's a kid that is that psychic, that really can tune in and have a lot of answers to say, are you hearing anything? Is there anybody here? What do you think about this? Is this right? Is this right? Because I had done it to my daughter, like, well, is there anybody here right now? Or like, well, and we'd be saying, well, what do you think about that? And I didn't want that. I wanted her to have a grandparent relationship that just was like grandparent, grandchild. I didn't want that. Now, in hindsight, I probably could have been more open about it, but I sort of come from a family that's a little bit more on the judgy, critical side. So I know that also would have come with some judgment, and she might have picked up on that, because she can pick up on if people don't believe it or not. So it's just sort of there's no right or wrong answer, I think. I think as parents, we're just trying to protect our kids.
Yeah.
The best we know how, until we know better, and then we do better.
I don't know what the right answer to it is either. Yeah. I mean, I same way. Like, I didn't really tell our family. And then it came to the point when I did this podcast that I was like, I need to address this. And I did 2 family meetings.
Right.
And like, knowing full well also too, is that I would pull Dominic into these family scenarios, and people wouldn't understand what was going on. But he could feel all the judgment and all that was directed. Like, even when he walked in the door, like, you could, you want them to know them for who they are. But then when you have a child that can feel all that and know that they're different, and that people are watching, it almost creates this perfect storm. You know what I mean? So that was an issue. And so I feel like when I had those family meetings, though people may have been judging me or thought I was crazy or not. There were people who, now that explanation, even if they didn't think it was right, was in there. And so you start seeing things. They start, paying attention, seeing thoughts. But you know what else I had to do is, when those situations would come up where my child's abilities were very in the forefront with family, is what I stopped doing is I stopped apologizing, and I stopped directing my attention to who was around, where I'd be like, oh, he's just this, and this, knowing full well how much my kid in that moment was either suffering or trying to figure it out, that I'd just be like, hey, Dominic, like, let's deal with you and let's get you out of here. And I'm sure I've offended many people, just like,
you mean by leaving the situation,
by leaving, by not apologizing for what he has said.
Right.
Because he's not cussing at you, he's not, not just knowing that. I just had to stop doing that, and that created a huge weight off my shoulders, because what I was choosing was the connection with my kid over the connection with whoever else.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, and I have been there too, where I've said, like, we're out of here. And not worth it, or tried to have short visits, or with you have to visit with family members sometimes. But learning that I don't have to expect my daughter to sit there for 3 hours. Like, it can be a short visit, and that's fine, without an explanation to the family member of, you're not the world's best energy, and my daughter can pick up on it, or giving yourself the permission to do that is huge, without feeling guilty.
It's difficult. It's difficult to parent this.
Right.
Whereas if you had parent this, because the resources are so limited, and you can't just like mine for people out there. Like, you generally feel who can kind of take so much of what you have to say pertaining to this subject. So like, you're out in the schoolyard, and I can't be like, is anybody having trouble with this? Because not only am I outing myself, outing my kid, it's frustrating. And but the more people are becoming aware, like, we are getting more and more space.
I think too, though, and this is something that Grace learned for sure, and through the Seraphim Blueprint classes. So especially in the first class, is you can learn to run energies on yourself, and there's a few you can run on other people that are for healing or emotional or mental, that kind of energy to help calm people down. And even though technically you're not really supposed to run energies on people without their permission, it's like praying for somebody, if you are wanting to help them. And so she's a sophomore now, but her freshman year especially, she started, and even in eighth grade, I guess, she would be sitting in class, and she could pick up on if kids were sad or what their different emotions were. And whereas before she would have taken that on and started to kind of feel that, and it would drain the energy from her, she would come home and say, I ran energies on so-and-so in class today. Could tell they were having a really bad day. And I was like, oh, you did? She said, yeah. I said, well, did it help? Yeah, I think it did a little bit. So she started learning how to not absorb, but perhaps use skills that she had learned to help others as much as she could without interfering, because look, everybody has to be going through something for a specific purpose. So I don't think we should interfere with people's lives without their permission. This was more an emotional state of friends and classmates and things. But I could see as she started to do that more and more, that it wasn't as upsetting to her as it had been. Like, it was easier for her to come home and let some of that go than to bring it all home with her and have to sort through it one by one. Now, I will say, I don't know what the other kids are like, but for Grace, being around, especially in school or going to Target or going to the grocery or anywhere where there's a lot of kids, that is, even if she's not trying to pick up on everybody's energies, or if she's working really hard at keeping everybody's energies or the spirits, because there's dead people walking around side by side with everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people. She would come home from all of those situations and literally after school every day, come home and she would just lay down in bed at least an hour, sometimes 2. She'd come up, get up, have dinner, go back, lay down. And at first I kind of was like, you're being antisocial. Why are you being like that? Until I realized, like, she's just exhausted. That's a lot of energy to be around. Yeah. And that was how she coped with it. And I do think that we should give these kids permission to not cocoon themselves, but let them be in their own quiet space. There's nothing wrong with that. We're helping them. We're keeping them healthy by doing that, I think. She's still a little bit will do that. She comes home and goes up and just chills out in her room for about an hour just to kind of re-energize and let that all go. But that's an important
piece
thing for all these kids, I think.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't want to end this because I have about 20 other questions I want to ask.
Okay.
You. But I do think, I'm dropping. This is not a very large book. However, it is poignant. It is poignant in a lot of things for people, I think, that you would want to check out. Especially, what was really helpful for me is I'm not in the teen years, but we you address that.
Yeah.
And then not being, I don't mean nosy busybody of a mom. That's not that. It's like learning the space. And there's going to be a time where they don't want to confide in you, or there's going to be times where they're going to try and shut down their abilities. And I thought that you did this beautifully. So
because I do talk about my daughter wanting to shut it down. Yeah. And she couldn't, because it is just who she is, and the struggle of all of that. Like, you can't.
Elsa from Frozen is what it ends up being.
Yeah.
That's what it ends up being. But thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Tara.
I'm so glad that I have your book. I'm going to actually give it as a giveaway. Okay. And the one last thing I want, would you please tell people where to find you?
So I do have a website, mariannacoomes.com, that I have started to. Initially, I actually stopped doing anything in one of my, we moved. There were a lot of reasons I stopped, but I have started to write more blog posts on there, and you can order the book through there. So.
Good. You're really, I haven't read your blog, but now I didn't know you had a blog. So now I'm going to be super interested, because I'm always, we're always looking for other people's perspectives. Yeah. Frankly.
There's no right or wrong, because every kid is different. We just take whatever we can from each place. Whatever works for you, I think, is important.
Yes, we talked about that before we got on.
Yeah.
It's so true. Thank you so much. And
okay.
We'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.